What is up, my teachers on fire? I still remember it like it was yesterday. It was actually in the fall of 2015, and I got an email from my principal at the time. His name was Paul Tigchelaar. He's actually still a principal. Good guy. He reached out to say, hey Tim, have you ever heard of Google Classroom? Do you know anything about it? And in truth, I had played around with it. I'd actually been introduced to it by my uncle, who is also a teacher. It does run in the family a little bit. But I hadn't really gotten comfortable with Google Classroom, and I wasn't using it yet. And you have to remember, in 2015, it was a little bit more primitive than what we see today. But that email from my new boss triggered something inside of me, and so I said, I am going to find out about this Google Classroom. And of course, I knew that I loved all things Google, and so I said, I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to get to the bottom of it. I'm going to figure out how to use it in my classroom with my students. And so that's what I set out to do, and that's what I did. And I ended up being able to help and support a lot of my fellow teachers and even other teachers at conferences about how to use this new platform called Google Classroom. Well, thankfully, Google Classroom has continued to iterate and evolve forward. And so 5 years later, it's a pretty awesome platform, and I'm a really big fan of it. Now, granted, it's not as fancy as Power School or Schoology or these other paid platforms. Canvas is another good one, or Blackboard and others. So I hear. I haven't used them all. I have tried Edmodo. Not a huge fan of Edmodo. Just being honest there. Google Classroom doesn't have all of the bells and whistles of these other platforms. Granted, it's actually helpful, I find, to think of Google Classroom as more of a shell over Google Drive. That's really all that's going on. You're distributing Google Docs and Google Attachments, and Google Drive is serving as that place to sort of archive everything and facilitate the whole back and forth permissions thing. But being a free platform and a free LMS, learning management system, I think Google Classroom rocks. And today I want to tell you 12 strategies that I've come to really love that I think will improve your Google Classroom life. Now, if you don't use Google Classroom, I don't know why you're still watching, but come along for the ride. Maybe you'll be converted and you'll actually convince your school to come on over to Google Classroom. And I should say this too, it really matters a lot where your school has their email hosted. If your school is a Gmail or a Google hosted school and you're already living in the G Suite, then Google Classroom's kind of right there. It makes a ton of sense to use it. If, on the other hand, your school is a Microsoft-based school and you live in Office 365 and your email operates through Outlook and that's kind of the world that you live in, then Google Classroom probably doesn't make sense for you. Okay, so here we go. Let's get right into the list. 12 Google Classroom strategies that you need to start using today. Number 1, hide and save. Don't delete packaged and posted assignments that you didn't get to during class time. Hide them, put them away, save them, don't delete them. Right now, here's the situation on Google Classroom. You can put together a beautiful little assignment with attachments and videos and instructions and criteria and all of that stuff and post it out into your Google Classroom world. But guess what? If you don't get to it during class time, you're left with kind of a painful dilemma. And that is, number 1, you can take it down, meaning you can delete the whole thing and you'll have to remanufacture the entire assignment the next day or the next class. Or number 2, choice number 2, you can allow it to just sit there, change the due date, and then run the risk of, in some cases, this may be fine, but in other cases, it is a risk that students will read your, let's say, your short story, consume your entire assignment, review all of your slideshow instructions, watch your videos, whatever you've got on there. And I get it. We want all of our students to learn all the time. When is learning a bad thing? I get it. But sometimes as teachers, we really want the element of surprise, because as my recent guest on the Teachers on Fire podcast, Caitlin Krause, reminded us, the brain actually learns better with an element of surprise. We've got to break patterns. Okay, so I'm making this point that it is good sometimes for students to just, boom, see an assignment for the first time. So back to the problem. You've posted it, you put a lot of work into it. Now what do you do with it? Because you didn't get it you didn't get to it during class time, but you don't want to delete the whole thing, I've come up with a solution. It's a pretty simple hack. I think you're going to like it. It's called staging area. You can actually call it whatever you want, but what I've done is I've made a dummy Google Classroom, and it's got no students in it, but I use it for the repost feature. So once I've made that beautiful little assignment that I didn't get to during class time, now I can just repost it into staging area, my dummy classroom, save it there, delete it in the original classroom, and then the next class, the next time my 8th grade English students come back to my class and I want to repost that entire beautiful packaged assignment with attachments, videos, instructions, criteria, all of that good stuff, I can just repost it back into the original classroom. And that has been a lifesaver. It's saved me so much time and energy, and a lot of other teachers have told me this has been a breakthrough for them as well. So I hope you find that useful. Tip number 2, enable real-time feedback for presentations. That's right, your students are presenting material in groups, whatever it might be. It doesn't really matter the subject, and you want to give them some real-time, some quick feedback. Now, I know you can do the old pen and paper thing, but if you do the pen and paper thing, you've got to figure out how you're going to, if you give them that pen and paper feedback right away after their presentation, you have to figure out how you're also going to transfer that into your own records, right? Are you going to take a picture with your phone? Are you going to type it and copy it really fast? How are you doing that? And so that is always a little bit of a challenge. How do we give real-time feedback, and also something that we can save for our own records? I have the solution, and that is something I've come to do whenever my students are presenting. I fill the entire private comment on Google Classrooms with all of the success criteria, with all of the instructions, with all of the features that we're looking for, with spaces for partners, title of assignment or title of presentation. The learning targets are there. I've even included emojis, a star emoji for things they did well, a prayer emoji or a wish emoji for things that they need to improve on. It's all set up, and so I copy and paste that 28 times into 28 private comments. It doesn't take as long as you think it will. It takes about 5 minutes, and that way, when they actually present, I can sit down, I can give them accurate and informed feedback in the moment. They get it right away as soon as they open up their laptop again, and I've got good feedback, good data for my records, and I'm not taking them all home to watch them again to give that evaluation and feedback. So it really ticks all of the boxes. Set up your private comments so that you can give students informed and accurate feedback in real time. Number 3, use emojis to code your learning activities. Now I have to give a quick shout out here to Shukes and Giff. Shukes and Giff? It's Giff because it's Jen Giffen. So I want to give a shout out to Shukes and Giff, their podcast. I haven't seen them a little bit lately, so I don't know if they're still producing as regularly, but they are phenomenal and they are so entertaining when they do air. So make sure you tune in and subscribe to Shukes and Giff. But I have to give them credit for the idea of using emojis to code all of your assignments in Google Classroom. And so I've started branching out. I used to just start with red buttons and green check marks, but I've gotten a little fancier, and I learned something interesting. One of my students this year told me, Mr. K, in a moment of vulnerability and trust, I might add, she actually said, Mr. KV, the red circles that you put at the top of our new assignments are so stressful, they actually give me anxiety. And so I've gotten rid of the red circles, or I'm actually in that process. And now, every time I post new assignments and categories, I actually use emojis like a brain and a muscle, because we want to grow our brains, don't we? And so use emojis to code things. And actually, like my colleague Chelsea is doing, really I should be coding every subject with different emojis. And don't forget to code finished work with that green check mark. Push it down to the bottom of your feed. You don't want to delete it, but you also don't want it to be in the way. So you just remind everyone, this is finished work. We did it back in term 1. It's behind us. It's done. You don't need to worry about it anymore. But you and I know we might be reposting from those assignments next year, right? So we don't want to get rid of them. But again, use emojis to organize your stuff and just make it so quick to visually pick out what you want to go after and where work is found. Anything you can do to speed up that process makes Google Classroom a better place. Number 4, it's not sexy and it's not convenient, but it is good pedagogy, and that is include learning targets for everything you post on Classroom. That's right, why are we doing this, Mr. Cavey, is a question that I used to hear. Not so much now, because I always include learning targets. Meaning, what are we doing this for? What are we trying to learn? What's the point of this activity? And you know what? I can't tell you the number of times that question, that step has sent me back to our curriculum documents to actually determine what precisely am I going after. And that is such a good grounding activity, good grounding step. Make sure you know why you're doing what you're doing. Make sure your learners understand what it is you're trying to achieve. Everyone's going to be happier. So make sure you're doing that with everything you post on Google Classroom. Include that learning target. Number 5, use that quick question feature on Classroom to get a quick sense of your learners' progress. Now, I know some teachers will say, my students don't always know how well they're doing. Actually, they have a surprisingly accurate view of their own progress. Just ask them and you'll find out. Now, you can keep this anonymous. They're not all seeing each other's answers. And so it really is just between you and them. You can actually put those little bar graphs up on the screen without names. And that way you get a really good sense of where your class is. I like this particularly in math class, where I can ask that quick question, a quick check-in. How are we all doing with the last learning target? How are you feeling about your level of proficiency? And I get a really good picture of where my class is at. And it's great data. So go ahead, throw up that quick question. It's not going to take you much time, and it won't take your learners much time either. Use that data to constantly inform your next steps. That's number 5. Number 6, share your homeroom classroom with all the other teachers who teach the same grade level and courses that you do. Now, maybe that is common sense or a no-brainer, but I bet there are some teachers who haven't thought of that or are not practicing it yet. You know, sometimes as teachers, we can be a little bit territorial about our wonderful lesson plans, our hard-fought activities, our creativity, our ingenuity. We want to kind of keep it to ourselves, right? But don't have that attitude. Share it with all of your teammates. It is super valuable for 2 reasons. 1, you can drop in on your teammates at any time during the week, day or night, and see exactly what they've been doing in their classes and in their courses lately. And number 2, it's a great way to borrow activities and resources. You know, if one of my great teammates, my awesome teammates, shout out to Lisa, Sharona, and Chelsea, if they've designed some amazing activities and put together some super awesome resources, it is nice for me to be able to go in there and either repost to my own classroom or individually save those resources and files. Either way, it's a great way to stay on the same page without having to do all of those emails and chatter. Number 7, something else you want to do is share your homeroom classroom with all of your specialist teachers. And that's right, maybe your band teacher has their own classroom for your students, or maybe your art teacher does, or maybe your language teacher does, but I'm betting they don't, or at least some of them don't. And it's really nice for them to be able to drop into your classroom and make that announcement, or share that PDF that they forgot to give out in class today, or whatever it might be. Let your specialist teachers share your Google Classroom as well. Number 8, post to multiple classrooms at once. Just last week, this came in handy for me because I happen to be working on the yearbook at our middle school. And guess what? I wanted to share a survey with all of our 8th grade homerooms at once. And so I put up the survey and I selected all of those 8th grade classes that I wanted to post to, and I gave the instructions once, and boom, it went out to all of them. 120 students got the survey, and that is efficiency. So if you're not doing that, or if you haven't thought of that or whatever, make sure you're taking advantage of that power, because it's going to save you time. Number 9, now something we have to talk about. If you're doing all this sharing of classrooms and you're all like, it's one happy party in everybody's classrooms, you've got 15 teachers in each one, maybe you do, that seems a little high. But at any rate, you've got to deal with emails, because guess what? Each of those classrooms, depending on how they're set up, they will be generating unique emails to every single teacher that is set up for that classroom, and it is too much. It is too much, and you do not need most of those emails. All you really need are the notifications that relate to your students, the ones you are actually teaching. And so you can go into your Google Classroom settings. Some people don't realize this. You need to sort of do another click at the bottom of the settings and get right down to notification control, and you can actually select which classrooms you hear from and which classrooms you don't. Because you know what? Yes, I need to know when one of my students leaves a private comment and a question. They need to know I'm there and listening, otherwise they will never use that feature. But by the same token, I don't need to hear questions from every other student in every other class. That's crazy talk. So make sure you customize your notifications. Number 10, structure weekly times for your students to actually get into Classroom, clean it up, organize it, and check their email inbox. I know this might come as news to you, but middle school students and high school students don't really care about email. At least my son in 8th grade certainly doesn't. He would probably say, eee. So we've got to give our students time to actually get into their inbox, check out those lovely messages, all of the feedback we've given from assignments, any reviews, evaluations, comments, private comment, all of that stuff is in their inbox. That's the engine. That's the communications hub for Google Classroom. And so they need to be checking it at least once a week. And so some of your students, if you're not doing this, they're never checking their email. They have no idea about the feedback you're giving them. So you want to make sure that you are actually looking over shoulders and walking around the room as your students get into their inbox. This is something I'm still working on, but I've started to get better at making sure my students are keeping track of Google Classroom communication through their Gmail account. Number 11, create a school-wide Google Classroom. Now I know the max limit for number of students is something like 500, and that's going from memory last I checked. So it really does depend on the size of your school. A lot of schools will be too large for this, but if you can do it, or maybe you do it for only a certain number of grades or a wing or whatever, it's a wonderful way to bring students on the same page. Let's say you want to survey your student body about a decision, or student council wants some information, or you're doing a special event, a hot lunch order form, or a big all-school field trip, or announcements, or sports information, or videos, or you're trying to solicit pictures for the yearbook that you want students to submit. Google Classroom is the answer. You can put all of those things in one Google Classroom. Now, full disclosure, I am not doing that at my current school because there is a limit to how much I can push and prompt, and I gotta just take it easy, just pace myself a little bit. But I have done this at previous schools. It's worked wonders. And so I would strongly recommend you go ahead and make one all school Google Classroom. You could call it announcements. You could call it all school, whatever you want to call it. I promise you it's going to come in handy. And the last one, number 12, is for my dear administrator friends. I am not an administrator, at least not yet. I am still in the classroom and loving it, by the way. But for my administrator friends, use a Google Classroom for your teachers. Now, some teachers may sort of rebel against this idea of being called students, but hey, just remind them we are all lifelong learners, and so there's really no shame in being a student in Google Classroom. And so this is something we do here at my school. We go ahead and we've made a middle school teachers classroom, and it's a great way for administrators to post resources, announcements, surveys, things like professional growth plan, and just like we do for our students, it's a great way to sort of monitor and intake work back from teachers without creating that endless email trail. And so think about setting up a Google Classroom for your teachers. It's going to facilitate some really nice opportunities, including, I didn't mention, sort of a bulletin board opportunity if there's a topic that needs to be discussed, if there's a vote that needs to be taken. A lot of interesting opportunities with Google Classroom, and it just brings everybody together in one place. Now, one thing that I'll caution you about, and that is, I don't know how much I'm a fan of pooling all of the shared resources that we use as a staff, let's say policy documents, reporting resources and things like that. I don't know if it's so effective to put all of that on Classroom. I think I'm still a fan of saving and sharing on Google Drive, whether you use My Drive or shared drives. I think those probably make a little more sense for some of those resources, but I do promise you, Google Classroom is going to come in handy when it comes to soliciting real-time feedback and contributions. As I wrap up here, again, I know Google Classroom has its haters, but you know what? It works. It's efficient, it's simple, it's powerful enough to get the job done. And so if you're looking for a great LMS that is free, whatever your thoughts about Google and big data, Google Classroom is a great place to get started. Hopefully, these 12 strategies that I've shared with you here today will make your life just a little bit more efficient, make it a little bit easier. And guess what? I've probably left out a ton of hacks and strategies, so if you've got some that I'm really forgetting, would you leave them in the comments below? I would be so grateful for that. My name is Tim Cavey. Wherever you are and whatever you're learning, take care and have a great week.